أعمل إيه؟ أقفل. Okay. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kariman Shouair. I run the research division at the Gerhardt Center, and I'm also an adjunct faculty in the Department of Economics here at the AUC. Today, I'm very delighted to kick off one of the most important parts of our flagship projects, creative finance for social impact, by hosting a great speaker and expert in impact and impact valuation, Sonja Haut. Thank you so much, Sonja, for being generous with your time and coming here to be with us today. Sonja is the author of The Case for Impact, and in her day job, Sonja is the head impact valuation at Novartis. She has worked on impact valuation since 2015, and she leads the Novartis Value Balancing Alliance engagement, and she co-chairs the Valuation Technical and Practitioner Committee of the International Foundation for Valuing Impacts. Before I leave the floor to Sonja and kickstart our conversation, I would like to give you a little bit of context. This lecture is a part of a 2 days program that is an integral part of the Creative Finance for Social Impact research initiative that is generously supported by the Ford Foundation. This initiative aims to frame a regional narrative around innovative finance for social impact as an attempt to establish some sort of a shared understanding and perspective on how different innovative finance mechanisms can be harnessed to derive social impact in the MENA region. In doing so, we embark upon a series of research activities, applied research activities, such as focus groups with cross-sectoral practitioners, experts and scholars, and the culmination of this work should result in an ecosystem mapping, policy briefs, research report, and other public-facing output designed to capture the current state of the field of creative finance in Egypt and in the MENA region. As such, your participation and engagement, not just in this lecture, but in the whole initiative, is highly appreciated. So thank you so much for coming. Also, I would like to announce that in this event, we are partnering with Impact for Breakfast Global Network, as we are now their chapter manager in Egypt. I will leave the floor first to Deborah Keller, the global head of Impact for Breakfast, to give you a brief about the network, and then we will start our conversation with Sonja. Thank you so much.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Good morning and a warm welcome from my side. It's an honor to be here today at your very first Impact for Breakfast event. Even though I'm joining you now via screen from Zurich, I'm just as excited if we were together in the same place. So thank you for having me. Today we come together for a very special meeting for the launch of the Cairo Impact for Breakfast chapter. I want to start by thanking Ali and his wonderful team at the John D. Gerhardt Center at the American University in Cairo. They play a big role in organizing today's and all future gatherings that they will be hosting in Cairo and that they will create for you. Let me introduce myself. My name is Deborah Keller, and I lead the Global Impact for Breakfast initiative. This initiative is supported by Artha Impact, the impact investing arm of the Rianta Capital Family Office, based in Zurich. If this is your first time at an IFB event, or if you're new to what we do, let me explain to you in a few words what our goal is. We are a community of practitioners that come together to talk about experiences, learnings, case studies, ideas, opportunities in an informal way and open way. Our main goal is to learn from each other, encourage action and support investments in projects that really make a difference. We started back in the days in London in 2008 with a small group of investors, and today we have grown to a group of 3,800 members in 34 different chapters around the globe, including Cairo today. Our aim is to create a space where people can learn from each other and work together to improve the impact sector. Our meetings are casual and are focused on building relationships and learning environments. This helps us take action and direct money into meaningful impact areas. Our events are put together by specialists and are a great place for coming together to learn about new solutions that tackle the big challenges in the impact field. Impact for Breakfast brings together different groups like family offices, foundations, funds, intermediary organizations, sustainable finance, and impact investing. So you're very welcome to visit our website, www.impactforbreakfast.com, and join us as members. Joining is free because we strongly believe in the importance of connecting with others and sharing knowledge to solve problems that make the world a better place. So we welcome everyone who wants to learn and share ideas, because working together is how we can truly make an impact. So let's start this wonderful journey of discovery, openness, and new ideas and opportunities. So again, a very warm welcome to Impact for Breakfast.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Now, let's start the conversation.
Thank you for your kind words of introduction, Herman, and thanks for the invite. Or just speak more loudly, that could do as well, does it?
There's a wireless mic if you need.
Test. Thank you, Kariman, for your introduction, and thanks again, Ali, for the invite in the first place. It's really a pleasure to be here, and it's great that you have such a strong cause to assemble such a splendid group today. What I have to bring to you is possibly a corporate view in my role as an author and having lived through measuring and valuing impacts in the corporate space for a number of years now. But I'd like to approach the topic of impact measurement and valuation with you through a first set of questions on why metrics at all, why impact, what's the case for it, and once impact measurement and valuation grows up, it actually becomes the impact economy, and then there are other actors who need to step up, and all of that, before we conclude, has certainly implications for leadership in a very broad way of actually defining leadership. Are we good for streaming? Excellent. All right. So the plan is, if I got the organizers right, is that we have some 30 minutes of me talking you through some thoughts, and then we open it up for questions. Is that right, Ali? Is that the plan still? Okay, all right. So why metrics? I'd like to approach the question through a number of quotes. The first one is from Yogi Berra, who said, if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else. A very humoristic way of saying you need orientation, a yardstick, a North Pole. I can see it here, but it's too white on that screen. Okay. Okay. And then there's a slightly more negative way of expressing the same thing, which is coming from Dale Carnegie on who starts out getting nowhere generally gets there, clearly expressing that same thought. In business, orientation typically comes through objectives, targets, other expressed in quantitative manners. And typical performance measures relate to financial performance. Now, at this point in stage, let's remind ourselves of a quote by Carly Fiorina, who said, the goal is to turn data into information and information into insight. So clearly, ideally, metrics are engaging for one and empowering for sure. Metrics may indeed help to set performance targets, drive strategy, tell us how we're doing against our targets, whether we're on track, whether we're off, whether the business hits its targets or actually has stranded. So with all these positive things to be said about metrics, let's look at what management guru Peter Drucker said about that. And he's often quoted with what gets measured gets managed. Actually, he didn't stop the phrase entirely there, but continued to say what gets measured gets managed, even when it's pointless to do so and when it goes against the very purpose of the corporation. So when metrics are the mirror of business performance, like in a mirror, it depends on which eyes you look into the mirror and with which intentions you look at this, and the picture will be rather different. So what is the actual or factual purpose will drive that view of the business performance. The underpinning aspect of this is the purpose of the organization. So with that in mind, and with the words of introduction by Kariman, you're not supposed to read that, by the way. With that words of introduction by both Kariman and Deborah, it will not come as a surprise to you when you read the recent publication by the Impact Institute together with Schroeder Wealth Management that encourage family businesses to start off with clarity on values in the first place. So this is what you see to the left. They encourage family businesses to be really clear of what it is they stand for and then drive the investment strategy after that clarity of values. For other types of business, a more classical strategy exercise like the one to the right may make sense to screen the external environment, the dynamics of stakeholders, to really understand where value creation and value protection areas come from. But even so, even this comes across as more sober and more down to earth, there's value judgment behind that, behind every one of these elements. And things become even more compounded and difficult if we understand that if we say this should be about long-term value creation, if we think about what the role of business is, then then moving into that notion of perspectives of long-term shed some further light of that. So depending on whether we look at life expectancy, retirement ages, attention span, what's long-term or short-term differs quite a bit. Now, in the notion of long-term value creation, the notion of value judgments, of value and values come together. And I'd like to point you all to a way of Colin Mayer from now the Blatnavik School of Business. The Oxford University describes this as businesses create value by providing profitable solutions to society and the planet, not by profiting from creating problems. So here we should take note of the fact that values are not ironclad. They can shift, and they are shifting. 3 points of evidence for that, very briefly, is that for one, impact investing has grown from nothing, 2017, to $1 trillion assets under management in dollars in the meantime, or last year actually. And then you may have caught up on Paul Pullman's statement of conscious quitting of employees leaving their employers when they experience that their own values don't coincide enough with the values put forth by their employer. And then an example from the consumer markets in the US for consumer packaged goods, they could see that consumers indeed start to care more about sustainable products and are ready to back this up with their wallets, that is, buy or not buy a certain product. So in macroeconomics, any macroeconomists here in the room by any chance? Because I'm not. So all of what I'm going to say is, well, learned on the fly. So I was told that there are objective statements of value and subjective measurements of value. And among the subjective ones, the measurement approaches are exchange value, value in use, or a revealed preference. And that notion of revealed preference is ever so important, which is why I believe that consumer angle is goes really a long way. So since this is hosted by the American University in Cairo, there may be the one or the other attendee who has an inclination to English literature. So in Shakespeare's King Lear, there's this point where the king says, "My kingdom for a horse. I want a horse, a kingdom for my horse, for a horse." So that's, of course, a revealed preference for wanting to give something outrageously valuable to something that seems small, but at that moment has such a high value that really almost anything is given away. And there would be similar day-to-day examples where people reveal maybe an extreme temporary preference for something seemingly small. But anyway, my point here is if we take all of these elements together, the subjectivity, the linkage of value and values, and the question of which metrics are adequate, finally, one arrives at the conclusion that this very much depends on the framing. How things are framed in measurement drive the underlying way on performance, drives ultimately what it is we believe is good performance, strong performance, and this shapes the economy. Now, stepping one step back for businesses, choices on metrics should be deliberate, they should be based in what it is they stand for. They should be in line with the business objectives. As you know, particularly non-financial data, there are often data points that are getting chosen internally or reported externally are, however, often driven by where data is available, what the company has done previously, and what other companies do. So mostly, these choices of metrics for performance are rather random. Now, with what we've known, what you've heard about the role of metrics, the question becomes how can that get us to a place that is really the place where we want to be? So, or more harshly asked, how can we expect random metrics deliver anything but random results? So for me, there needs to be a clarity around where the business is headed. There needs to be a plan, ideally derived from a point of where we have clarity about the purpose of the corporation. Now, we don't need to hang it that morally high, but anyway, plan beats no plan. And I'm really convinced about that rather deeply, that plan beats no plan, particularly in an environment that has been characterized for the past 30 years as volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So in such an environment, having metrics and the clarity on the plan is ever more important than it may have been in the past. To make it super explicit, I believe we need more adequately selected metrics, more intentionally chosen metrics and measure of performance. Short, we need impact metrics. What is impact? What is impact? It's defined as a change in well-being in one or more dimensions, either directly or indirectly through a change in the environment, can be positive or negative, intentional or unintentional. And so actually, still important to note, can be an estimate that is potential or actually experienced. So with that notion of impact that is differentiated from conventional metrics of inputs and outputs, one can really have an entirely different assessment of where the business activities end up with respect to stakeholders and where the business as a total ends up. Now, what you see here is also referred to as an impact pathway, coming from a theory of change, whereby one really tries to discern where a business activity ends in the stakeholder and which positive or negative difference it really makes. All right, so in short, when randomly chosen metrics deliver random results, impact metrics can actually help deliver impact results by intention and by design. Now, this makes intuitive sense, but I'd like to share with you some evidence that actually there is a business case for impact. That business case, in short, comes from contribution to top line, to the bottom line, to value, and I expanded on that in 7 areas for which I bring examples, and I haven't started to track time. But anyway, let's go through each one of them to just have a glance at how this could look like. The South Korean conglomerate in financial services, chemicals, telecom, and also energy, SK Group, are quite vocal about their social impact. They've been tracking and tracing and measuring and valuing this for a long time, and their chairman puts it in such a statement on the Korea Herald. And they're very clear that this communication through their products and services on their social impact is a differentiator for them in the market. Then a case on talent attraction and retention coming from the pharmaceutical Eisai in Japan, where their former CFO, Ryo Yanagi, had actually looked for ways to encourage the corporation to embrace investments in R&D, which is sort of an obvious thing for a pharmaceutical, one should think, but also in human capital through more investment in female managers, childcare, also skills and other elements. And and in the model that he developed together with the Harvard Business School Impact-Weighted Accounts Initiative, they found that actually this delivers value to the company over a 5 to 10 years horizon. Having said, investment innovation should be self-evident. It never is. So there's this KPMG case together with Göteborg City, who were wanting to move to electric cars, which comes across as sort of self-evident in a Scandinavian country wanting to decarbonize. It was not, because also they needed to make the case towards the taxpayers as to what the period of return is going to be. Next, 2 examples on operational efficiency. I think that's probably the easiest notion. I mean, very easily thought. If we save light, fuel, energy, then that inevitably has a positive environmental notion. But here, PwC have put it further in their own examples, applying their total impact measurement and management approach to their own practice, and therefore helping them stay track on decoupling a growth path from an environmental footprint path. A similar line of thought had actually triggered TUI Group to look into this, but then by seeing the impact valuation results, they discovered that actually the volume business and volume metrics for tourism doesn't make all that sense anymore, and that they should be thinking broader for a most effective resource allocation. Next, 2 examples on risk. That was the driver for Ambuja Cement in India to think about what would happen if today's exposures that become tomorrow's risks and day after tomorrow's losses actually do translate. So that financial risk perspective, if you wish, has helped them to get a sense holistically for their total externalities around a series of environmental factors. And in the meantime, they're actually part of the Holcim group of cement. Then a similar line of thought for the energy provider in the Netherlands, Alliander, on getting clarity on externalities as a signal for exposure, signal for risk beyond the next 12 months. capital access, market valuation, I found it interesting to find that actually Infosys, the IT consultancy and service provider, needed to explain their shareholders why they invest in people, sort of also self-evident for a consultancy-based business in technology. Of course, employees need to be up to date, need to be kept up to date with their knowledge and skills in that field. Still, they wanted to be transparent about what it costs and what it yields, and engaged with GIST for an impact assessment to deliver that. And then there's been the interesting case of Sonja Generics Pharmaceutical, who've made their market entrance by calling out their social impact of $180 billion. What does come through already in the introductory remarks by Deborah and also by Kariman is that notion of there's a need for theme alignment. There needs to be an alignment across different actors on what are the joint facts that we observe and that we use as a basis to work from. So I think the Natura example of an integrated profit and loss based on an impact variation towards their P&L tells quite a long story around this and goes a long way. Natura are the owners of Avon and The Body Shop and other cosmetics, and have quite a wide base in communities in Brazil in the Amazon forest as well. So the entire spread between fairly high-end luxury goods and the reality of their communities of suppliers tells a known story. Now, in summary, why impact valuation? There's a practitioner by the name of Kering. They have started off with an environmental P&L years ago, and Kering are quite clear on their homepage on that there's actually not a single benefit of the approach, but a whole array. So once companies embrace this type of thinking and lean in and start to do some sense making about the figures that they see, start to look at their own business through external eyes, they start to appreciate that the greater insight actually helps them advance. It helps them getting clearer about their strategic choices, and then maybe two aspects that are a different way of saying theme alignment. It strengthens relationships that are important to do business, so relationships in the business ecosystem, but also delivers a joint understanding of where one puts priorities. Because there are lots of things that could be done, right? But what to prioritize. And lastly, it contributed to improved performance. So all of these examples are in the public space, and that's of course not self-evident, because the moment something makes good business sense, why would one share with potentially competition? So this is why I would want to explicitly call out the example of Solvay. Solvay have translated their risk assessment into a strategy. Solvay is a chemical company. They started to become highly aware of the environmental footprint by product and needed to, well, they didn't need to, but they came to conclude that some of their environmentally damaging products that carry high profit margin would be vulnerable to be substituted by more eco-friendly products. So by that insight, by that segregation of their portfolio, what they started doing is to actually direct their own R&D efforts towards more eco-friendly versions. So they started to deliberately and in a targeted way to disrupt themselves. Most of these examples have been large businesses, so a tasty example to conclude that round of examples coming from a star restaurant in the Netherlands. Here, that's an example of a purpose-driven leader who owns those restaurants. He wanted to really understand what they can do through their lines of business. It wasn't a market orientation type of thing, needing to please the consumer or being clear about risk. Was really about something on, hey, I understand that with meat-based meals there is a carbon footprint, but can we know more? And what is it that we could do prospectively to be more sustainable in our products and services. So they reached out to Fritz Klaver at Deloitte to conduct this and have now transparency across their 3,000 ingredients and where they come from and how to go about that. So inevitably, by talking you through these examples, there must be the understanding that each of these companies sort of discovered impact measurement and valuation on their own. And in the meantime, there is quite a great level of alignment, for example, through the activities by the Value Balancing Alliance. It was formed in summer 2019 by 8 companies plus the big 4 audit and consulting firms with the ambition to harmonize impact measurement and valuation. In the meantime, this has come a long way in several dimensions. For one, this has been not just published with documents that are available on the net, which is the case, it's under valuebalancing.com, but also the member companies that are in the meantime 30 have tested and piloted the approach. And testing and piloting means that there's proof of evidence beyond individual examples. There's proof of scalability and usability of such examples as well. Right, exactly. I wanted to tell you as well that is the one dimension of scale and usability across different sectors in the VBA. But the VBA itself has also teamed up with what's now the International Foundation for Valuing Impacts. It's the Harvard Impact Weighted Accounts offspring to harmonize approaches across the Atlantic. On a certain high level, things look the same, but then there are slightly different choices of words that make things look different. And clearly, standardization is one driver of easier adoption and bringing down the cost of engagement. So, right. Indicators that are available off the shelf, if you like, are these across social, environmental, and economic dimensions. So you see a right-hand side tick box where there's a VBA method paper available. There are 2 instances where these are about to come. But in the social dimensions, it's about the social impact of wages and salaries, here called living wages, employee development, occupational safety, and then also work-related human rights. In the environmental dimensions, it's the usual suspect of greenhouse gases, CO2, but also other air emissions, water, waste, and land use as a proxy for biodiversity losses. Economic is the straightforward GDP contribution and employment. So already quite something. So if you're comparing contrast that with lived reality, where companies shyly start to be clear about their CO2 measurements and maybe scope 3, clearly much more is possible. Want to skip that. Right. So in my definition of impact and what I've focused on so far and what I want to continue to focus on is actually the notion of impact as a value to society concept. There is a notion of value to business that actually is also sometimes called the financial materiality. 2024 marks the 20th anniversary of a certain UNEP FI document on the materiality of social environmental, did they call it impacts? Effects. The founding paper on the ESG movement at all. ESG, environmental social governance, has arrived at companies some few years back as something that actually is put forth by the financial market. Now, this is strangely competing with an intuitive understanding of sustainability. That is much more long-term value creation and bringing value to society. So as more and more ESG engagement is happening, for the moment unstandardized, there's a bit of a confusion, and that has come through in a number of articles and publications over the past years. I bring you 3. The one is the yeah, and of course they're of various degrees confrontational and have different intensities. But Bloomberg have called out the ESG movement a mirage. Others have called it a gravy train. And aggregate confusion was one title of the Financial Times. And the reason for this is that this information transmission between what gets measured in non-financial terms is actually, there's no standard. Pre the upcoming EU regulations, there's no standard for that, and some of these indices go really, really deep, so that one cannot easily compare. In the words of a joint friend of ours, ESG is not woke, certainly not, as a delimitation to what's happening in the US, but it's also different from sustainability, and I think I want to agree with that. So I had the opportunity to contribute to an article for the IMD Business School to explore on what is now the relationship between ESG, the upcoming regulations that are hitting EU companies and those making business with the EU, and the notion of value to society on measuring impacts and measuring what makes a difference to stakeholders. And it was a great opportunity to really lean in and think about are these competing issues? Do you have to do compliance first and value creation later? How should we conceptualize that? And I've concluded that in any way, companies will have to up their game with respect to data collection, processes, governance, and all of that. And so going all the way to impact sometimes is just an incremental addition on why not getting some data points slightly more granular, in a slightly more granular way. And while you're getting your CO2 transparency on your supply chain, it's almost the same identical effort to get air emissions, water waste, land use through the same mechanisms in the same way. So what's an incremental effort now may pay out as a preparation for the next step rather immediately. So I don't think these are competing objectives. Anyway, since anyway, so there's an evolution ongoing, and I believe it makes sense to just take stock a bit on what this means for business and where the entire sustainability thinking, or if you like, movement comes from. So historically, with business as usual, philanthropy came on board, and sustainability was a nice to have. That is, when the going gets tough, these engagements were getting reduced. Then someone discovered sustainability as a reputational thing, and there was maybe a bit more choice on those philanthropic engagements, and there was this invention of corporate social responsibility, or corporate responsibility, different flavors of that, but core business remains still untouched and still runs as business as usual. Now, with compliance requirements, I believe business as usual still remains largely untouched, but gets an addition of a governance element. And at the back of that movement, what's also happening is that sustainability becomes a business. There's a need for consultancies to explain how businesses should adopt, what it is they need to comply. So there is that aspect. But circling back to Colin's Mayer statements of the long-term value creation job for businesses should be to create profitable solutions for people and the planet and not profit from creating problems, that is actually best described in an impact economy, or when all businesses operate within the boundaries of a donut economy. Now, this was the corporate perspective, if you like, on impact measurement and valuation with the case for impact in businesses. But the impact economy that this would all add up to if impact measurement becomes accounting is something that last year the largest Swiss bank, UBS, have called out in their white paper on the impact economy. It's a noteworthy white paper, some of you may know it, calling out what it takes for the real economy and the capital markets to actually bring forth the impact economy, and which needs on standardization and transparency and all of that we need. Now at this moment, and because also the framing for the session was pretty much around the SDGs and creative finance, I'd like to sidetrack us briefly on the notion of how impact is positioned. And I guess the term got some fame through the UN SDGs and subsequent positioning of closing the SDG gap as an investment opportunity. I mean, scholars have worked on discerning what the gap is between where we are now and us collectively reaching the UN SDGs, and those 2.5 trillion will only get more at the current pace of progress that some say we will take 200 years at the current pace. So anyway, the positioning of impact investing as a vehicle to close that gap clearly gave the term some fame. And then there are touch points between impact investing and impact accounting at corporations. And I believe as accelerating a desired change at scale will need that any type of investing becomes impact investing. And there's still some bridges to cross, but I guess with the ABC of impact investing, that is avoid harm, benefit stakeholders, or contribute to solutions, you could also classify any regular type of investing without having to call it impact investing. Anyway, very briefly, there are a few similarities, but currently more differences between impact accounting and impact investing, and I guess we'll have to work through them collectively to close those gaps in definitions. Most notably, clearly, the idea that it's beyond financial returns or performance targets, but also consider social, environmental, economic elements that both approaches have in common, the notion of a definition of impact and that there should be metrics. The notion of additionality is reflected in both concepts. But then in a corporate side, and the notion of impact accounting really covers the positive and the negative, the intended and the unintended, and that goes far beyond what one normally does in impact investing, where one needs a clear intention on what the positive difference is, and this is what then the forward-looking target is. Rarely is there any follow-up, rarely is there any ongoing measurement on this. But yeah, I guess the uniting factor is that both approaches look after impact. They seek to go beyond inputs and outputs, beyond outcomes even, to measure and treasure impacts. And clearly, as said earlier, plan beats no plan, so credits to everyone working in the field to advancing the topic. Now, this was very briefly on the corporate impact world and even less on the financial market perspective on impact investing, but where are governments? I'd like to call out two elements. 2021, under the UK presidency of the G7, they published reports, and they founded the Impact Task Force and published reports targeting the notion of the needs for impact transparency in corporates, but also how the capital markets need to move towards impact investing. A tad less abstract and more tangible is the EU endorsement of the Value Balancing Alliance's work on environmental impacts, where in the CSRD requirements there's a note on saying, like, if you want to comply, you could actually adopt the value balancing approach. So while things are still not settled and the various economic actors are not totally aligned, there's an emerging convergence, if you allow me to call it that way. Before we close, I promised to say a few words on leadership, and with leadership I don't mean a hierarchical notion or an org chart, but really agency that pertains to all of us in our lives and in our roles in institutions and groups of people that we're part of. So one is the context determines decision-making styles and leadership styles. So historically, most contexts, and well, in the not so far away history, most contexts were simple or at best complicated, which means one could actually look for a best in class, one could look for what has worked elsewhere. It was fairly simple to work with a linear priority list, and was clear what excellence means. Now, with things getting more complex, it's certainly a domain of experts, but even experts may not agree conclusively on what the best way forward is, because such a thing doesn't exist when things are really, really intertwined. And there are implications on that, and that one needs to hold that thought and not disintegrate when exposed to that. But I'm not sure about you, but certainly for most senior leaders, no, it's not fair to say. So, no, but the way business schools and university have taught business in the past was clearly you have a Pareto principle of the 80-20, and there are simple things, and you should go after low-hanging fruits. Well, such paradigms may not longer hold, and we need to be clear about which context we're in. Is it really a simple or maybe a complicated thing, or is it in fact a complex environment? And then when things get chaotic, anyway, it's a matter of stopping the bleeding and reacting the best way. So a book that I'd like to recommend at this stage is George Kohlreiser's Hostage at the Table. He's very clear on that it helps people to be clear on their inner purpose and clarity of their mind if they really spelled this out for themselves, and even in the most trying situations that are dangerous for one's lives, this may make the difference that brings a situation to a conclusion. Then I called out reframing earlier. There's a recent HBR article on reframing, and this is such a powerful tool. It can mean zooming in, zooming out, finding a different angle. But really, it depends on how one frames the problem, and sometimes unexpected solutions come about when one does. Then, two thoughts on innovation. The world is full of ideas, but sometimes we're not staying course with execution and resilience. So there's something to be said about the art and discipline of execution. And having just an idea is maybe cheap and doesn't go all the way. And then if you do want to take it all the way, there's a notion of what is most advanced yet acceptable. It's the Maya principle from industrial design that really means, well, you need to take your ecosystem with you, and you don't want to overdo it. It's a rather personal thing, that because as opposed to earlier times, it's not the case that we're bound by our genetics, by our DNA, to what it is, who we are, and what we do, and what it is we become. It's now clear with the knowledge about adult development that it's up to us. It's the the environment we expose ourselves to that actually determines who we are and what it is we do. So it's much more culture and to a lesser extent nurture, that is our upbringing, and to an even lesser extent nature, that is the DNA. So also on a personal level, not just for institution, plan beats no plan. And being deliberate about those elements of what it is we want to do, and being intentional really goes a long way. And then if we do get it right, if we're clear about our own purpose and where it is we want to take our institutions to, then maybe we will manage eventually to flip the VUCA from volatility to vision, from uncertainty to understanding, from complexity to clarity, and ambiguity to agility. Let me close with the words adapted from Christiana Figueres onwards, with outrage and optimism. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sonja. Very fascinating, informative, and thought-provoking. Before we open the floor for questions and answers, I would like to hear your thoughts more about the tension between standardization and localization. Standardization, of course, facilitate data aggregation, benchmarking, and measuring, and it makes it like way easier to measure impact. However, measuring impact is very much context sensitive. So I'm wondering, how do multinationals navigate balancing between standardization and localization?
Let me attempt a response. Well, you're right, and actually both is required, right? Actually both localization and more standardization on just about any new metrics set is required. Now, not being a scholar, so just from a practitioner's perspective, the proposal put forth by the Value Balancing Alliance and also by the International Foundation for Valuing Impacts is actually to arrive at supply chain impact transparency by using input-output models. So that's based on national statistics on how sectors interrelate across the globe. Now, are national statistics perfect? No. Now, not about you here in this room, but from my experience as a practitioner, there's something to be said about data that you're using or that you're not using. So I believe firmly that our collective national statistics will improve by us using them. So the moment they get used more and exposed more, then there will be efforts to actually improve on them, improve their accuracy, improving their reach, and all of that. To say we can't use them until they're perfect appears a bit as an excuse to me.
Thank you so much. Okay, now, please, if you have a question, just raise your hand and the ushers will hand you the mic.
Thank you, Sonja, and thank you to the Gerhardt Center. My question is about localizing this discussion about impact valuation. Do you have any examples of companies in Egypt currently that are doing this? And I know that you work at Novartis in Switzerland, but let's take them as an example. So does Novartis here also use those same metrics and do that same valuation that they do abroad? Do we have any examples to go on here?
I'm here in my private personal capacity, but I think it's fair and totally in line with corporate statements in that we have consistent corporate results and data available for 190 countries at Novartis.
Questions?
Hi, thank you. You talked before about the impatience that the youngs may have in the earlier session. I waited to ask this with a wider audience. How can we keep this flame on in teaching our students? I'm teaching in the AUC, so how can we as educators help in keeping this flame on, the impatience? As you know, people, when you are growing up, you lose, you lose that impatience.
There's a whole array of thoughts on this. So, for one, there's the Aspen Institute for Business and Society. They have a fellowship program, First Movers Fellowship, that is pretty much on intrapreneurship. So if you can tell your students how to be a good intrapreneur, even if they're not a CEO, then this goes a long way. Now, linked to that notion of an intrapreneur is a lot about who do they want to be in their lives? And it's not so much the question on how much money they want to earn, but with their skills, with their interests, what is it that they want to be known for? And what are the things that they truly believe in? It's very much that question that Schroeder's and the Impact Institute put in front of their family businesses. Who do they want to be when they've grown up. It's a question that makes sense for all of us, of course, to be clear. But I think this goes a long way on, and then equipping them with tools like framing, reframing, asking questions, and not being happy with the status quo. I mean, I'm sorry to bore you, I said that earlier, but economics, business, the way we construct what good looks like, what we attribute appreciation and good performance to, is not a law of physics, but somehow we collectively grew into this or agreed to that, which means we can also collectively change this. So I guess it's anything you can do to encourage them on their agency, that sense that it's down to them and it's not good enough to say, well, someone just do something about it. It's not going to happen. So I guess an element is to encouraging them to actually stay true to their convictions. And staying true can also mean that they shift, by the way. I mean, clearly, over time, thinking back when how old are your business school students? 20, 21? I mean, 17 even. So, of course, not to say that there's not an evolution, but giving them a sense that all of their decisions matter and they do make a difference. They should never feel like they themselves don't make a difference, they do. And linked to that are concepts of giving voice to values, teach them to speak up, not in a confrontational way, not in a negatively, but also not hiding their true feelings and their true assessments. So giving them, equipping them with ways of saying, what is it that they don't like, what you like, what they'd like to see more of, what they would like to see differently. And then clearly there are elements of advanced carrots and sticks. So pushes and pulls. Their innovation is not evenly distributed, and some places or some people, some industries may be ahead of the game here or there. So maybe you can teach them to scout for the type of solutions that they're interested in or that they feel strongly about, so that they get better in emulating what's possible and what's out there, instead of saying, well, I cannot do it, it's too complicated, it takes too long, right? It's easy to get depressive around when one acknowledges all the things that remain yet to be done. But yeah, so these would be a handful of tools that I could recommend.
Yeah, hi. So I want to get your deeper insights on the ESG argument you've been building. So I can see the critique around that, but what's the downside of this argument in the sense of diverging us again into something else that nobody has consensus on, and then we're going sort of in circles, and corporate have very short attention spans, as you've said, anyway. So if you tell them now, you know, ESG is not working, let's do this other thing, and someone else. So, you know, these academic, intellectual discussions are very useful, but they're, yeah, it might not go anywhere. So what's the pragmatic solution rather than the intellectual academic solution to this issue?
Was just tempted to say I feel you. The thing is, ESG is a reality in the EU. There is upcoming regulation, so it's a matter of fact. So it's now a compliance topic, and it's not a matter of academic debate or so. It just is. So it's a hygiene factor. It's something that also financial market actors need to get their head around, because they're asked to classify their portfolios along certain criteria. So it is happening. So I'm certainly not saying do away with everything. Do I think they could have been? They could be better? Could they be more close to what's also usable for businesses? Yes. But it's not to say in any way doesn't make sense to deny, because it is happening. But I also understand how the role of ratings ranking indices filling the information gap between companies and investors without that has really was bound to create confusion, right? Was bound to create confusion. If you see the volatility of all those different rankings indices, they're sometimes much more volatile than the stock market and not going in the same direction either. So what's the information content there? So good that there's some standardization upcoming, yes.
Hello. So I'm a group chief sustainability officer of an investment holding company in Egypt and in East Africa, and practitioners on the ground, just like yourself in one area. And we've really been very early adopters since 2015 of the whole concept of sustainability, the SDGs. Now, trying to make this, to democratize this and make it more of a sector / a country move versus a few of the early adopters that have been leading within each sector has been really challenging. Part of it, you've touched on some of the challenges. I think there's the lack of understanding and awareness of the business case, and obviously all the VUCA and just the whole uncertainty, so it's not a priority. But once you try to bring it to the actual business, you realize that you cannot make that shift alone, because within your sector, particularly in our countries, there's not the demand that is you have to manage as a producer, as a company in the West or in other markets, in the global North. In our markets, there's a huge gap between supply and demand. You come up with a greener product, is the consumer willing to pay for it or not? The financing gap is a huge issue also, because it's not just about financing the SDGs. Now we're talking about companies financing the change in their operations, greening their operations, and looking at the life cycle of their products and managing all of those aspects. So I'd like to hear your view on what are some of the ingredients that are important. I mean, obviously there's the regulatory environment. How do you get this collaboration within sector, cross sector, within geography, across geography, so that you can get that move in the scale required? And I think the last point I want to ask about here, to just make sure the question is complete, you mentioned the new rules, and this is this whole shift from compliance to value, and how businesses today are being driven more by being compliant and checking the box, or trying to make sure they are not left out. How much of all these new regulations happening in Europe, like CBAM and others, risk alienating countries like ours or African countries or companies that are trying to make sure they maintain being part of the game, exporters, and all of a sudden they're being slammed by all of those regulations without any work together to come to solutions. The collaboration is missing here. So you're really finding, from this year, we're starting to have these CBAM rules, and what impact that will have, because there is absolutely a backlash of feeling it's a new form of colonialism and increasing the divide between the haves and the have-nots. We're even starting to hear terms like carbon grab versus land grab in Africa. So just interested to hear some of your thoughts on this. Thank you.
Each one of these aspects is really complex in and by itself, and compounding them. But I mean, there's a reason why I put this out. I'm not ever claiming that I would have answers, but I'd love more people to at least keep seriously thinking about it, right? With a positive intention of wanting to bring about solutions, because just stating the problems is easy. So still, collaboration is key. I think Deborah's statement from early on about their journey around impact for breakfast is just a point in case, in that none of that, as you said, none of us can bring any of that about by themselves. So are there platforms for like-minded businesses? Are there any linkages of anyone within Egypt, outside Egypt, within a North African alliance? Are there, who are potential allies? And then With that, what are elements of reinforcing elements? Can you bring home some of the things like this is what they've done here and contribute to their efforts by saying, well, this is what I do here. So is there something like that possible? Is there a way of using trade unions or chambers of commerce, any linkages of outreach to actually say, hey, have you considered, and it doesn't have to say, well, actually, I don't like you because you don't consider that, but more in a way of, hey, shouldn't you? I would have thought that an institution like you also considers, just to engage with them, maybe that's providing you a platform. Then on sector level movements, I'm actually still quite in awe by Nestle about their impact journey. They must have realized early on about the role of food and externalities related to that. So what they did is not just found a coalition around their sector, but around the entire food system. And I had the pleasure of being one of their conferences at some point by another flavor of Oxford University, to really start the debate on which externalities are there in the first place and who should be picking them up, because it's not obviously the consumer, but it's also not obviously a government. It's none of that is sort of obvious, but I guess it starts with creating a basis for facts and also inviting, for that matter, since we're at a university here, inviting more targeted research. There's stuff that would really be where we'd need more knowledge. So I guess even if one doesn't arrive immediately at solutions and a path forward, having something where you can approach universities and saying like, okay, some master degrees maybe on this one would help me. So not to say that I have any easy answers, but maybe I could give you some leads.
Egypt already have been working a lot. I mean, the American Chamber of Commerce, we have the group on impact and sustainability, and we're sharing across. That problem is the size. We're still very, very at the very early stage. And I mean, this is why we're working with academia. AUC plays a very critical role for us as an institution overall, where we're trying to engage and see, not just in terms of academia and studies, but case studies and other things that we can share. Alliances and coalitions, so no. And coming today to listen to you is absolutely part of this whole learning and growing process. Thank you so much.
Before I start my questions, do you have time?
Yeah, we're good. We have
Okay.
good 10 minutes.
Exactly. Okay, my first question is about intentionality. For me, this implies pre-planning, and it implies design. So is it necessary when you have impact that you'd have a design, so it's really strategic? This is not something that you could have on the fly? This is my first question. Additionality also is very interesting. And this is, by the way, not just for corporate. When you think about most of the interventions we do, and what I have in mind actually is something, European program we have is called Industrial Modernization Center. And it used to pay cost of doing business to big players. And for me, this falls right away the additionality, because those guys could have done it without you. And so anyway, but that's the first thing, is about how do you think of impact? Now, I'll have to admit, I mean, when you get into things like, there is a curse over long term. Usually, unintended consequences appears on the long term. There are hundreds of examples. Nestle is one of them, by the way. Their dried milk, when they started using it in Africa because the water was polluted, was actually a mechanism to do more harm for kids than actually do good. But you could not have never found this in the hygienic environment of Switzerland. So again, and we don't teach, by the way, in business classes, system science or business. We used to teach it in the School of Business, and when we stopped, because the perception was it's old-fashioned. Then it's coming back again. And I think it helps students to understand a lot of things. Now, my last comment is about, for me, ESG is about do no harm, not about do good. It is risk. It is very risk mitigation mindset. And you're just telling people, I'm not causing any harm. Now, the question with it, for me, the big question, other than it could be whichever philosophy you want, is unaudited. There are no clear standards, and it tends to be unaudited. Most of the sustainability reports are unaudited. I'm relying on somebody who wants to look good to tell me his story. And frankly, I do not believe it, unless it is audited by a reputable third-party auditor. Thank you. I could have gone for half an hour, but anyway.
All right, intentionality. So the entire idea of impact investing used to be that you have a target with the UN SDGs and that you direct your impact towards improving that situation. Now, that is nice, but also limited because you don't think about other impact dimensions that could unfortunately be negative at the same time. So by singling out that one dimension in which you're really excelling, you could really do unintended harm. So here's the thing why I like the broader definition about impact much more. Look at the positive and the negative. Look at it through your entire value chain as ever possible. Look at social, environmental, economic, simultaneously, unintended, intended, positive, negative, actual, potential. I think that definition carries a lot of weight because otherwise we will see lots of investment, lots of capital flowing into closing the UN SDGs, but we will not trace the progress in reality. Right? We will say, well, we invested trillions and we're still nowhere. So this is a bit the, yeah, so remains to be seen, but I guess this is where I'm coming from. The notion of additionality is interesting, and the question of replacement and so forth. So it's something that is captured in the International Foundation for Valuing Impact method paper in how you think about baselines, in what it is that you go back towards. And I guess you can be a hyper purist in saying there's no value to anyone in this table, because if that supplier hadn't supplied it, there'd be someone else. And you can be purist on the other extreme on saying we would be sitting on the floor without a roof if those suppliers hadn't constructed that building. So I think both aspects don't really help. I think that notion of a change in well-being is really also powerful because it's not the entire heritage, but in an impact accounting perspective, what are the tons of CO2 in the last year, or what are the projected tons of CO2 or increase in square kilometers of land use? So that's may not be academically appealing, but it's something really down to earth. I mean, so something traceable. And then you had point 3 on, additionality, intentionality, and then your third point, I'm sorry, Ali. The audit, right. Audit is straightforward, audit is resolved. So if you're, as a company, if you're clear about your processes, then you could invite someone to audit what it is you say you do versus what it is you actually do. You don't need a Stanford for that. Which also means that at the back of this, any company that doesn't do it, why don't they do it? So that is one side. Then with the upcoming regulations, there are rules, and then there are interpreters of these rules, and hence there are upcoming efforts for limited and reasonable assurance for all the data points in the sustainability report, for sure, in the European Union. So let's see what comes from there. To the point that was made earlier, is it nothing? No, I don't think it's nothing. I think it does go a long way. Does it go all the way? No. But I guess I guess your point on auditability is pretty much on how serious is a company on what it is they put in their sustainability report. Is it a sustainability report or a PR report? So, because if it was seriously about sustainability, then they would be clear about why they trace certain indicators, right? Even if they're not a standard, they would be clear about what's really material to their business and why it is they go about that, or what's really material to their key stakeholders and why it is they trace. And then when they start tracing it, they could have controls, procedures, according to, it's not like, what is the managerial effort behind those statements? How serious is it? Is it, and then I think that you can see, and is it, are things at the same level as SEC filing or an annual report? No. You're not happy.
No, I'm fine. It took them 50 years until they come up with financial standards. So we'll see how it takes. And financial measures are more understood than society measures or sustainability measures.
Yeah, there's a role of awareness creation to be taken up by business schools.
Okay. Can I ask a question? Okay. Should we make like a case for impact, or just the making of impact as an essential item in making any business? And should we just give them like rewards or bonuses, or just as incentive to make this impact, like exemption of taxes, or just a priority in some things?
Should there be incentives?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. But it's also not trivial. Like, from whom should these incentives come, and what is it that you should incentivize businesses for? So, would there, maybe not calling it incentives, but should there be a favorable business environment? Yes. And that, then the question is, how would that be encouraged? And I guess there are well-known frameworks about institutional reliability and all of these things. So the moment these sustainability topics get elevated to the same thing, like, how would you translate this? Would that be possibly, since you mentioned tax, would it be a tax relief for, because was it in, no, it was in the earlier discussions where we came several times at the point where we said, well, there's an upfront investment. Could there be a tax holiday for the first 2 years to cover those upfront investments? So there could be vehicles like that. Certainly all of that helps.
We close by question from here.
Thanks, Sonja, for the insights. So I'm building up on every, like, the discussion going on. Usually in corporations and business, it's always about the ROI. Any large corporation, the larger the corporation, the more they're very considering the return on investment, the return to shareholders, and that's where all the environmental measures and other sustainability measures comes secondary. They just want to save their costs and gain a higher profit, and you know, basically that's what's happening globally. And even on country levels, when let's say, for example, to be like talking about a practical case in Europe and North America. They wanted to stop a lot of polluting industries. Cement was one of them. They couldn't stop them because they need cement to build new buildings, so they kept increasing the environmental tax on the cement production until the companies decided it's cheaper to produce in Egypt and Algeria, and most of the European cement comes from North Africa because it's just closer, it saves money to transport the commodities, right? So when a certain region, let's say a more developed region, or takes measures, what happens is the need for the business will continue. And that's where it becomes difficult to create an impact on the environment, because it's, okay, they took away the pollution from Europe, but it's in North Africa. So the question I have for you is like, in the middle of this global corporate-driven environment, how can these measures come into place? When you mentioned impact investing, can you elaborate on that, please? Like, what do you mean, like investing towards something that has a strong impact on the environmental measures, or is it something?
Yeah, impact investing comes from that notion of the recognition of the gap that exists towards now and the UN SDG goals achievement. So impact investing would be an intentional, additional, measured progress towards closing that gap, and there is an emerging framework on this by the impact management platform supported by the UN and the OECD and a number of others. That comes with an easy classification in addition to the definition, which is A, avoid harm, the realm of ESG, B, benefit stakeholders, C, contribute to solutions. So now with the upcoming regulations in the EU, it's not only disclosure requirements for corporates, but also for financial actors. So if they want to say they are an avoid harm type of fund, they need to prove this in the future. If they want to say, well, actually, this is a positive, sustainable fund, they also need to provide evidence for that. So impact investing is that, and it's a thing that has come from the idea of, could there be combined public-private efforts to resolving something sustainably and profitably, whereby everybody is better off. And yeah, it's still rather nascent, but I think the idea goes a long way in that all investing could be risk, return, impact, and it wouldn't have to be small, community-based, and so forth. To your other question on yeah, exactly, those shifts, particularly about environmental sustainability happens, but couldn't that be called out, right? Couldn't that be made transparent? So I think since you called sort of this country as a recipient of the damages occurred, I mean, there's no one who obliges you to remain silent of this observation, right? So I think information flows and transparency go a long way. And to me, this is, by the way, also the reason why I think this notion of non-financial reporting transparency on just own operations will never cut it. You need to have total supply chain transparency, impact traced ideally, because this is when what would prevent to get rid of negative externalities by just moving them somewhere else. Is that mainstream? Of course not. But I think examples like the ones you have in mind and partially alluded to actually would support on saying, well, actually even with your beautiful regulations, it's another flavor of ticking the box, actually satisfying consumers who ask for sustainability, and then governments trying to do something that, well, but I think calling out these idiosyncrasies and these elements where things actually may not be entirely thought through goes a long way. Do I have solutions across the globe? No, of course not.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for your engagement and for great discussion. Thank you so much, Sonja. That was very inspiring. And yeah, we have a session now. I'm going to continue our conversation with the CSR officials in Egypt to reflect on what we have just started. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you, Deborah. Thank you so much.
Thank you too. I wish you all a great day ahead.